In terms of today's session, I guess the reason we decided to address this topic, which is beyond ERP systems and addressing the gaps in invoice automation or AP automation, is I think when organizations look at their accounts payable function and they want to make a change, they've got a couple of options. Option number one for any organization is always do nothing, right? Continue to process the invoices manually match them against purchase orders, receipt notes, manually route them for approval, manually store them in digital filing cabinets or on different SharePoint drives. You've also got an opportunity to use the native solution in your accounting package or your ERP system. So most of you using any of the modern accounting packages or ERP systems potentially will work with a partner, and that partner might recommend a solution. Or there's built-in functionality to support the accounts payable process. And then the final option, which is where the Kefron business comes in, is you use a best-in-breed third-party solution. So ultimately a plug-in to your application. And I thought we'd just unpick some of the elements and the pros and cons of both options if you're thinking about, I guess, making an investment in this type of technology. So in terms of what we're going to cover for today's session, we'll be relatively short and sharp. So we're out of here in the next 25 minutes. We're going to talk a little bit about the evolution of ERP systems, which is an interesting topic, I think. I'm not going to spend loads of time on that, but just to give people a snapshot of where ERP systems have come from and ultimately where they're going. We're going to talk about native versus what we're calling best of breed. So I guess when I talk about native, we're talking about inbuilt functionality versus best in breed, something that's very, very specific, built around a specific business process. So for example, an accounts payable tool. Obviously for today's session, I want to give you a bit of an insight into the Kefron AP system and ultimately what it does. And to do that, I'm going to give you a little bit of background via slides. Okay, so for those of you who don't know Kefron as an organization, I touched on this briefly. Founded in 2017, the original group was founded in 1990, so over 30 years old a couple of years ago. We are 300 customers strong in our Kefron AP business. We process on average about 1 million documents each month through our solution. And we've got integrations to a variety of ERP and accounting softwares. So if you've got any ERP or accounting system that's been built in the last 25 to 30 years, we'll have successfully integrated to that system. Our flagship product is a tool called Kefron AP. And ultimately that tool is designed to receive invoices, process them, and post them to an accounting or ERP system as quickly and as efficiently as possible. We're going to kick off today's session by just taking a little bit of a look back. And we'll talk about the evolution of ERP systems as a whole. So I guess to give you a little bit of context about ERP systems and their timeline, I guess it dates back to the early 60s. And the early 60s effectively was very much driven around basic process automation. So between 1960 and 1980, very much driven by the manufacturing industry. And the first kind of evolution of an ERP system was actually an MRP system, so a material requirements planning system. And that system was very focused on automating manufacturing processes, which were traditionally very labor intensive, very manual, and relatively basic. Specifically, MRP systems were focused on manufacturing processes around inventory and production. In the 1980s, there was an evolution to MRP Phase 2, and ultimately MRP Phase 2 focused on shop floor control, demand forecasting, and then capacity planning in manufacturing plants. So between 1960 to 1980, really focused on basic process automation, very much on the manufacturing space. The expansion of scope came in the 1990s with the emergence of the ERP system. So the ERP system effectively emerged to include wider business functions. So there was an expansion of scope in the 1990s. And the expansion of scope included business functions that we all know and love today: HR, finance, supply chain, and procurement. And the ultimate goal of the ERP system in the 1990s and now in 2024 is to ideally give one real-time view of an organization, from your HR function to your procurement function. Towards the back end of the 90s, ERP systems started to design the system as a whole in a modular fashion, so a modular design. And all that means today is you can pick and choose the different modules that you require to suit your business, right? So for example, we use Zoho CRM in our organization. Zoho do have an ERP element and an accounting package. We've decided specifically to focus on our sales engine or our marketing engine to use that tool. Obviously, other organizations would use their ERP systems to run the whole organization right across the group. In the 2000s came customization and complexity. So again, businesses started to need in the early 2000s very tailored solutions. And this is where we kind of saw the emergence of, I guess, niche offerings in different industries and organizations. So vendors started to offer industry-specific modules that had the ability to modify and basically fit to unique processes. So customization around specific ERP systems started to become very, very normal. I mean, you look at the ERP landscape today, you can see that different ERP systems, whether at Oracle, NetSuite, Sage, across the board, all have very specific niches where they ultimately started. Right, even NetSuite today, for example, as an ERP system, does very, very well in manufacturing organizations, high growth retail, that type of thing. Globalization had a massive, massive impact on the evolution of ERP systems because ultimately there needed to be a support for multiple languages for organizations that are operating globally with different entities in different locations, obviously multi-currency, and then regulatory requirements in those countries. ERP systems then moved, I think, to mission critical technology. So I don't know any successful business today that doesn't have some form of accounting or ERP system in their organization, which are all continuously evolving. So you can see tools that maybe are pure play SME accounting software is starting to add new functionality via third parties like Kefron, or via just adding more functionality to support wider business processes. So these ERP systems are consistently evolving. In 2010, you'll all remember the shift to the cloud. And ultimately what that meant for ERP systems was anyone could access any ERP system from anywhere in the world. What that ultimately meant was a reduction in the need for expensive on-premise infrastructure, and it made it much easier for organizations to scale and improve accessibility. So ultimately, when I think about our own customers investing in cloud technology, most of the organizations that we would work with are multi-site, multi-entity organizations, and they also operate internationally. Now, they may have a small presence internationally, but it makes it much easier for them to set up an entity, give access to users on different systems, and make sure that the communication across the organization, as well as that one-time real view, remains. The emergence of SaaS in the early 2000s up until 2020 obviously had a major drive from ERP vendors delivering solutions via subscription model, right? So a fixed recurring revenue model, which is effectively how most technology and software businesses are valued. So ultimately you're paying a monthly fee based on, maybe it's based on usage, maybe it's based on volume in terms of the volume of documents you process in our solution, for example, and you're paying a subscription fee each month to that vendor. The great thing about SaaS models for organizations, not just the providers, but for businesses, meant that it really removed the barrier to entry to access and purchase those types of ERP systems. So smaller businesses now could afford ERP systems that were easy to implement. You don't need to spend hundreds and thousands of pounds on implementation. And systems like that will be, your NetSuites, your Accounts IQs, maybe a Sage Intacct type solution. So it made it much, much simpler for smaller organizations that are growing to have world-class technology in place to support their growth. And then into the 2020s, I think we're all probably sick already of talking about the emergence of AI, but unfortunately it's not going anywhere. So modern ERP systems obviously started to incorporate AI, machine learning algorithms, and very, very specifically advanced analytics to support their domination of the certain markets that they decide to operate in. I think from now, AI, machine learning, in a product Kano model, which is ultimately giving you an indication of table stakes, which would be something that's customers would expect in an ERP systems, right to delighters and exciters, which are things that excite people about investing in your product, and things that really delight people in the product also. We see AI and machine learning kind of moving from an exciting feature to table stakes, right? So it's almost like a hygiene factor now for any modern ERP, accounting, or technology system as a whole. Ultimately, what that meant was ERP systems started to look and broaden their horizon to ecosystems. So if you think about any of the ERP systems, they've all got effectively websites where you can go and purchase third-party applications to plug in and effectively unlock the power of the ERP system. And they're typically very much focused on business process, or whether it's accounts receivable and automating processes around that, accounts payable, which is obviously the tool that we provide. The ecosystem for ERP systems allowed customers choice, number one, and then it also gave them opportunity to invest in best-in-class technology. So my premise would always be, ERP systems are amazing at what they do in terms of the core functionality, which we're going to touch on that they deliver. But they then started to look at best-in-class technology to support their customers via API. And that's a really key mechanism in terms of transferring data between systems. I think there's been more of an emphasis on user adoption. And the reason for that is because ERP systems probably in the 2010s of 2020 were probably what most organizations would classify as sticky, right? So it's kind of difficult to rip out and replace an ERP system. But the emergence of SaaS has meant that it's actually relatively straightforward to move from one ERP system to another, depending on how it's implemented. And I think the big driver behind that is, when I joined Kefron in 2019, the kind of average tenure of most ERP systems was, 7 years at a minimum. And now we've seen that kind of shift to every 3 years. Organizations are looking at different ERP systems between 3 to 5 years. And what that meant from a UX perspective or a user experience perspective is ERP systems kind of got the message that if we want customers to retain with us or stay with us long term, and that's ultimately building the value of their business, it was really, really important that there was mobile accessibility. The user interface was really simple and easy to use, so customers genuinely liked and loved logging into those platforms. So hopefully that gives a bit of an overview as to the timeline of the evolution of ERP systems. If you look at where we are today, and I just take some functionality from NetSuite, who's probably a leader in that kind of mid-market SME to mid-market space. So if you're an organization joining today and you're an SME, maybe you're looking at things like Xero or QuickBooks. You might be a growing SME and you're thinking about taking that next jump to a NetSuite or a Sage Intacct. Or maybe you're a global organization and you're thinking about going to an SAP, a Microsoft, or an Oracle. This is just giving you an indication from a NetSuite perspective, some of the functionality in and around the core modules that they support, right? So you've got everything from advanced procurement to contract renewals to demand planning to advanced financials and inventory. So it effectively supports every type of organization in every respect. Now, they're obviously experts, NetSuite, or any ERP systems are very specific and experts in core functionality. Right, the things like demand planning, advanced procurement, job costing, depending on the type of organization that you are. And what the ERP systems have now started to do is they started to develop solutions to support back office processes. So they focused initially on these core functionality processes, and now they're starting to develop functionality to support back office processes, which are, to be fair, were probably afterthoughts. So things like accounts payable and accounts receivable solutions, even though they've got options to support their ecosystem and partners that they would work with, like Kefron, they're now starting to develop out their own technology. And what you'll probably see moving to these types of solutions is they're offering free trials, they bundle it in, and really the reason they're doing that is because they're effectively waiting for the technology to catch up, right? Kefron as an organization or any third-party best-of-breed solution has probably been in the space for the last 7 to 10 years. So we're very, very focused on delivering best-in-class solutions to support our customers, which ultimately has taken us those 7 to 10 years to get to, and we become experts in that space. And that's what the ERP systems are now trying to add as core functionality to their solutions. If we take a look at kind of the native versus best in breed. So again, native functionality is maybe inbuilt functionality directly to your accounting or ERP system. A best in breed or a best of breed type solution is the third-party application that usually lives outside of the ERP system but connects directly via an API. Let's take a look at some of the differences. Well, from a native perspective, it's integrated directly with the ERP system. And there's pros and cons to that, right? One of the cons that I would always hear from customers is it can cause confusion about where the process starts and finishes. So if I take an accounts payable process, if we're doing a matching process, which will be taking the purchase order and the receipt data from the ERP system, the invoice comes in, it matches against that purchase order. If there's a breakdown in that process, when it's integrated directly to the ERP system, it's very difficult for the user to understand where the breakdown in the process has been. And that can mean different support tickets being raised at different areas, and it's very hard to do root cause analysis as to where the process has fallen down when it's in a native solution. With the best of breed solution, ultimately what that means is it's a separate system, usually hosted outside the ERP system. It's very, very specific for business process and function, and it's connected via the API. So the transfer of data, for example, purchase orders from the ERP to the Kefron system, for example, is all done via that API. Now, what that means is, the great thing about that is it's very clear. There's a clear distinction as to where one process starts and one process takes over. Next, for most of the native functionality, so for AP or accounts receivable, most of those processing solutions that native ERP systems are providing to customers have only recently developed, right? So they're relatively new to the market, and they're good options, right, for basic processes. So a lot of our customers who are now customers but would have already trialed the native functionality will come to us after a few months of using the native functionality, and they'll talk to us about, the fact that our solution is a mature product and service. It supports complex processes, and it's clear that it's been built with years of input, right? And what I mean by that is, if you're processing from an AP perspective, 50, 60, 100 invoices a month, the native functionality is probably perfect for you, right? It's going to be a relatively basic P2P process. If you're an organization that's processing 4, 5, 6, 100 or 1,000 invoices a month, you probably need a solution that's a little bit more complex in terms of the customization. Right, so the matching algorithms, how does that work? From a coding perspective and an automated routing perspective across the organization, what kind of functionality can we support to effectively maximize automation? And that's right now where the native functionality is falling down. And then the last one here is from a user experience point of view. A lot of the feedback that we get when I ask a customer, how do you find XYZ ERP system or accounting software? They'll usually say, yeah, it's good. Little bit clunky, it can be slow at sometimes. The UX isn't maybe as modern as we would expect, and we pay pretty chunky fees from a license perspective. When you think about best of breed solutions, it's so important for accounts receivable software or automation software, AP automation software, to make sure that they retain those customers. And to do that, it's so important that we drive best-in-class standards around the user interface, because that drives user adoption. Right, and that's a core focus for third-party applications. In the Kefron world, again, we don't charge for those user licenses, so there may be a cost-benefit analysis that you could do to maybe cancel some of the licenses in your ERP system, maybe for your approvers, and move into the Kefron solution from a cost perspective. And I'll leave you this interesting stat. About 50%, so 1 out of 2 ERP customers buy third-party best-of-breed solutions. So they've made a decision, the functionality that's existing in the ERP system is not where we need it to be yet. We're going to market for a new solution, and that's ultimately why the Kefron tool exists. That leads nicely on to Kefron AP as a tool and as a system. So if you've been exploring the world of accounts payable automation, you're thinking about investing in this type of tool, obviously we'd love to have a conversation with you. For today's session, I just want to give you a bit of an overview as to how the tool and the system works. And then what we're going to do is touch on some of the questions and maybe a bit of a system overview. So Kefron AP, I touched on it briefly, about 300 customers globally. We work with SMEs right up to global multinationals. And ultimately, it's a productivity tool. It's designed to capture, process, and deliver your invoices from receipt of your supplier directly into your ERP system ready for payment. There's 3 key things that we're trying to achieve, whether you're an SME or you're a global multinational. And that's reduce manual data entry at the front end. Okay, so the inputting of data, if you're spending hours each week or each month on manually inputting data to an accounting or ERP system, immediately you can reduce that. Kefron's secret sauce is we reduce the manual data entry via using AI and machine learning algorithms. And we've built our own models as well as using best-in-class third-party applications like OpenAI. But we also support that process via people. I'm going to come on to that in the next slide. The second thing we're trying to do is we're trying to automate the manual tasks. And when I talk about manual tasks, it's not just routing an invoice for approval or matching an invoice against a purchase order automatically. They're obviously big use cases, but really what I'm talking about is when an invoice comes in and your team are having to categorize the invoice, right? They put it into a certain folder for a certain supplier, or they categorize the invoice on the type of spend, for example. All of that work that's done in terms of sorting and categorization at the very front end of the process is very, very time consuming, can all be automated. And it can be automated using the AI in terms of the document routing functionality. Then we move on to things like the data entry, as I touched on. Coding invoices can be done automatically for your non-PO invoices, routing invoices automatically to approvers, to approve invoices, sending them reminders that they're not approving on time, matching invoices against purchase orders as quickly as possible. And then finally, from a query resolution point of view, we touched on it briefly on the last slide, but ultimately, because we don't charge for user licenses, what I say to all of my customers is think about all of the stakeholders that are involved in your P2P process, right? Your procurement team. If you've got a warehouse team or a goods in team that are receiving goods and services and inputting that into your ERP system, give them access. And give them access because it's no commercial impact on you. And when there is an issue or a query or a supplier is not set up in the ERP system, or an invoice comes in and there's a discrepancy between the purchase order and the invoice amount, or the carriage is on the invoice and it should have been raised on the PO and it's not, the communication tools in our system will make that so much quicker to resolve. And that's a major, major challenge for most organizations, as well as obviously the advanced analytics that our solution will provide. In terms of how it works, really straightforward. We're going to take your current mailbox. We're going to set up an auto forward in that mailbox. All of the invoices that come to your current AP mailbox will automatically forward to Kefron. As soon as they forward to Kefron, the software is going to open the document. It's going to use a combination of AI technology as well as machine learning. And again, we've developed our own intellectual property, which is a Kefron AI model. We also use different AI models from market-leading vendors. Most of you will know who they are, OpenAI, those types of organizations. And ultimately, what's going to happen in that instance is the software is going to make its best guess as to where the information is on the page. And when I say best guess, don't let that alarm you. What I'm really saying there is the software has learned through the models that we've trained with the millions of documents that we process every year, where the information is likely to be on the page. So whether it's the bank details, the PO number, the invoice number, the due date, the payment date. The software is going to extract that information. And if it can't find the information on the page, the beauty about our team is we optimize the software. So we provide this solution as part of a managed service, which ultimately means if the AI ever fails to pick up your PO number, your invoice number, your bank details, before that comes to your team as an exception, it's going to come to one of our team. And what they're going to do is optimize the software. Now, what that means is, and how it's different to a native or an inbuilt accounting or an AP automation tool, is all of the ERP vendors will rely 100% on the technology to get the information on the page. If the technology fails to get the information off the page, that's going to come to your finance team. And your finance team are going to have to teach the software where to find the information on the page. In the Kefron world, if the software can't find it, which is rare, but if it can't find it, we're going to ensure that our team are going to step in, optimize it, and it just takes that burden away from you. I can't tell you how many times organizations and clients have come to me to say, James, we invested in that system. We had viewed Kefron, but we invested in this system over here. And the extraction software was just terrible. It couldn't find anything on the page, couldn't find the invoice number, couldn't find the PO number. And we spent all day teaching the software where to look instead of processing and paying invoices. And a lot of the customers that have come back to us from using native functionality, unfortunately will say, we actually worsened our payment credentials in terms of paying suppliers on time as a result of investing in that tool, because the team spent so much time teaching it. We're then going to go into validation, PO matching, coding, and approval. And these are the automated manual steps that we touched on. And then we're going to post that data directly to the ERP system. And what I'm going to do is just answer a couple of the questions that have come in really quickly to finish off. What is the role? So Stephen, what's the role of AI and machine learning in enhancing invoice automation beyond what ERP systems can offer? AI and machine learning is being used by accounting and ERP systems to extract information off documents. Okay, so they're using it to support the extraction process, as are Kefron. The challenge with that is that technology, no matter what any vendor tells you, is not 100% accurate. So if it fails to pick up your invoice number, it's going to fail time and time again until one of your finance team have to support it. The AI and the machine learning algorithms that we then use are going to be used to automatically code invoices based on using the AI algorithm. So based on how the software knows how you code your invoices. And then it's going to give you predictive AI matching against your invoices and your purchase orders. So it's really, really going to drive some of that functionality home. Joe, are there any potential risks we should be aware of when augmenting our ERP with additional automation tools? The main risk, Joe, is integration. So it's really, really important that the system that you choose to invest and link to your ERP system, number one, ideally has experience integrating with that system, okay? Or if it doesn't have experience integrating with that system, their integration method for that system is well tested, right? So it could be via an API, which is pretty, I guess advanced functionality is probably the wrong term, but you'll know what an API is in terms of pushing and pulling information. Depending on the version of your ERP system, you may actually decide to do a flat file exchange, which is just sending data between the two systems automated, but it's using file sharing mechanisms. So I think the really key thing is to think about integration, but you can de-risk that, Joe, by just talking to a customer. So ask the vendor that you're speaking to, hey, we use Sage. We want to speak to a Sage customer about your experience, how you did the integration, and what kind of benefits you're getting off it. And from my experience, I wouldn't buy anything, any software that is, without having a conversation from a reference perspective. Key considerations, Linda, involved in implementing invoice automation software alongside our ERP system. Very interesting. Linda, I think that's something that we should pick up separately. I think the key thing to do is align your UAT testing for your ERP system with your AP system, if you can, ideally, right? And the reason I say that is because you don't want to invest in a new ERP system. Your accounting team and your finance team are all excited about the new ERP system, and then they get their hands on it and they're manually inputting data into it. If you've made the decision to change ERP and you've made the decision to invest in a best in breed, try and align as much as possible your UAT, so your testing period for your ERP, alongside the accounting or the AP automation tool. Last one, how does this software ensure? Okay, I think I've covered that, Linda. Which is just around how does the software ensure accurate data extraction from various invoice formats? Combination of AI, machine learning, and then people is how we maintain 99% accuracy. Any solution on the market that's claiming 100% accuracy, unfortunately, just is not true. And I can prove that by, I could scan a PDF document, paper document, I could pour coffee on it. Your driver, if he's in his truck, could have it in his truck. He could crumple it up, he could put it in the scanner, and then the software is going to struggle to input and extract that information, or it's got handwriting on it. And I think the rule of thumb would always be, if it's difficult for a human to read, it's going to be difficult for the extraction to read, right? So that's really, really important. Be very, very wary of some of the claims that are being made in terms of data extraction accuracy. That brings us to the end of today's session. Hopefully that was useful. Hopefully the evolution of ERP systems was an interesting topic to talk about, but more importantly, the gaps in invoice automation. No option is right, no option is wrong, but hopefully we gave you a bit of an insight if you're going along this journey as to some things to think about and consider.